In this podcast, what you'll learn about are cleft sentences and how to use them in English. Welcome to
Aprender Inglés with Craig and Reza.
Hi, I'm Reza.
And my name's Craig.
And with over 50 years of teaching between us, we'll help you improve your English and take it to the next level. Craig, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you. I'm pleased to be back podcasting with you again this week. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. I'm enjoying the start of my summer holidays. Since I'm a teacher, most of my classes finish in June. And from then onwards, I have a little bit of a breather, a bit of time to myself. Now, don't worry if you think, hold on, it's not June, it's December. Yeah. We get it. We record these podcasts before they're released, and we have a big back catalogue going back years. So you could be listening to any episode at any time. But right here in Valencia, when we're recording today, it's a lovely June day. And yeah, I'm feeling fine and looking forward to my holiday. What about you?
Well, I'm really sorry to be doing this to you. Today we're talking grammar, so you have to put your holiday to one side for about half an hour while we look at cleft sentences. Now, if you are a listener who's come back again, thank you for joining us. And if this is your first time listening, go back and listen, as Reza said, to previous episodes. We talk about grammar, vocabulary, different topics, all kinds of things. Today we're focusing on cleft sentences. But before that, Reza, we have a message from Victoria from Madrid.
Hi Reza, hi Greg. My name is Victoria. I live in Madrid. I really appreciate your job. I enjoy your podcasts very much. I would like to share an idea about the phrasal verbs. Your last episode was about phrasal verbs, and I find it very difficult to remember all those meanings. So why don't you add a song where every phrasal verb is used? I think it will be easier to remember. Anyway, thank you for your job, and don't give up. Don't give up, 'cause you have friends.
Thank you, Victoria, for suggesting that we write a song with every single phrasal verb in English and then sing it. We'll do that for you. I wonder if ChatGPT could do it.
I was just thinking that's a good job for ChatGPT. That would be a really good thing.
Leave that idea with us, Victoria, and we will look into it for a future episode. But you got me thinking of songs that have phrasal verbs in them. And connected to what you were singing at the end, most listeners will not remember David's Soul. Do you remember David's Soul?
I do, but
Starsky and Hutch?
Exactly. I remember him more for Starsky and Hutch, the cop show, the TV series, more than his singing, because I was a kid at that time and that was the big American show. But I never fancied him much as a singer, to be honest. What about you?
No, I didn't like him as a singer, but I did remember, don't give up on us, baby. Don't give up on us. There you go. Give up on someone. There's a phrasal verb. And who doesn't remember Grease? You got to shape up, 'cause I need a man who can keep me satisfied.
So to shape up is what? What's the shape up here?
Get your act together. Be serious about it. If you want me as your girlfriend or boyfriend, then you have to shape up. You have to get serious and really try to win my emotions. You got to shape up.
I got me thinking as well, back to my childhood. David's Soul didn't come to mind. That was Craig's one. But I was forced as a kid to listen to a lot of Carpenter. Forced. Let me explain. Driving around in my dad's car in the 1970s, he actually owned about 3 cassettes. They were quite expensive in those days. They were kind of a luxury. And one of them was Carpenters. if you think that's bad, another one was Charlie Pride, and there's a couple of others. But anyway, he had a Carpenters cassette, yeah, not a fancy CD, a cassette, no CDs in those days. And so I was forced to listen to it. And you know what? A weird thing has happened. Has this happened to you? Songs that I was forced to listen to and thought that I hated when I was a kid, as an adult, I've ended up really liking.
Me too, yeah.
It's the memory of them. It brings me back to my childhood.
It takes you back to a certain time in your life. ABBA is the same with me. I hated ABBA when they came out because they weren't trendy. They weren't for people of my age, a teenager. So ABBA, now I really like their music, but I hated it when it came out.
So I have a confession to make. I am a fan of Carpenters. I really am.
Which song of theirs has a phrasal verb in it?
Well, one that came to mind because I just happened to have been listening to it the morning when I heard that we'd be talking about phrasal verbs was Rainy Days and Mondays. Because you know what? Rainy days and Mondays always get me down.
What does get you down mean?
To depress, to get you down. And there's no point in trying to talk it out. We know what it's all about. To talk something out, to talk about something to see if you can understand it, to see if you can come to an understanding. We know what it's all about. To be about is full of phrasal verbs, I realized.
And two more that came to my mind, All Shook Up. I'm All Shook Up by Elvis Presley. I'm all shook up, Elvis Presley, All Shook Up, which means I'm disturbed, I'm agitated, I'm not calm because of you. I'm all shook up. And U2, I still haven't found what I'm looking for, to look for something. There must be hundreds, if not thousands of songs with phrasal verbs. So if you can think of any, we'll give you our contact details at the end of this episode. Why not tell us more songs with phrasal verbs? I did find a website with 7 songs with phrasal verbs for Victoria. So if you go to inglespodcast.com/472, there's a link to 7 more songs with phrasal verbs.
And Victoria, can I say, I really like your idea because you're quite right. You will definitely remember the phrasal verbs better through learning them in a song than just on a list. 20 million times better. They'll stick in your memory. It's a really good idea to remember phrasal verbs. An excellent idea.
I've got a question for you. Apart from listening to this podcast, are you doing anything else to improve your English? Maybe you're watching some YouTube videos. Perhaps you're watching TV series and films with subtitles. You might even be reading in English, maybe a blog post or even a book. Do you remember books? What do all of these things have in common? Videos, podcasts, books? Well, they're all passive. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. It's good that you have language input. It's good that you're consuming English, that you're listening to it and reading it. But you also need to produce language. You need to speak and you need to have conversations. You need to interact with people and communicate. You need to be more active if you want to feel comfortable and confident when you speak. Now, I know it's not easy. Taking the next step and going outside of your comfort zone can be difficult. That's why I started conversation groups online. When you join me on one of my conversation courses, you'll be in a small group of motivated students who want to improve their fluency and hesitate less when they speak English. Here's Christina, who's currently participating in her 4th conversation course with me.
Hi Craig, how are you doing? Well, as I told you in my mail, I will take the next conversation course because I feel that I still need to improve my speaking and listening skills. Although I am much better than I was at the very beginning when I started with your conversation course. And another reason is because I feel very good with the group, with you, It's nice. I enjoy the classes. I really enjoy the classes. So I will take a new course in June.
So what do you think? Are you ready to take the next step? If you are, send me an email to craig@inglespodcast.com and I'll give you more information about my conversation and fluency courses. I really hope to see you on the inside. So now let's move to the main topic of today's podcast, and that is cleft sentences. Now, some of you may not be aware of the meaning of a cleft sentence. So what does cleft mean, Reza?
Well, cleft means divided or split. It comes from the verb whose infinitive is to cleave. That's C-L-E-A-V-E. And cleft is one of the forms of the past participle. It actually has two forms. You can say cleft or you can say cloven. Both sound a bit odd and they're both irregular. So cleft is the past participle of to cleave, which is divide or split.
And we use these cleft sentences when we want to give emphasis to something in English, because they put attention, or we can say they draw attention to certain information because we place this information at the beginning of a sentence. Now, before we give you some examples of cleft sentences, let's hit people with some grammar, Reza. How do we form or make cleft sentences?
Well, there's a couple of ways, but the most common way, you will see or hear a form of the verb to be, followed by a noun phrase. That could be just one word, one noun, or a couple of words together, like a man or a good man or a really good man. Or it could be a pronoun, like I, he, they, whatever. Then you'll get a word such as that or who or where or when. In other words, a relative pronoun followed by a relative clause. Now, we've already spoken about relative clauses, Craig, back in a previous episode. Can you remember which episode we spoke about relative clauses?
The best thing to do to find that is to go to the search box on inglespodcast.com and type in relative clause or relative clauses, and you will find all the episodes in which we speak about them, and also Victoria and other people interested in phrasal verbs. If you type phrasal verbs into the search, you'll get a list of all the episodes in the past about phrasal verbs.
So, Craig, could you maybe give us an example of this form of a cleft sentence, the it plus the form of the verb to be, a noun phrase, then a relative clause with a relative pronoun?
Yes, you can say a normal sentence, an ordinary sentence. For example, Harry paid the bill. Harry paid the bill. But if you want to emphasize the fact, you could make a cleft sentence and say, it was Harry who paid the bill. Or it was Harry that paid the bill. So we're emphasizing Harry as the one who paid the bill by using it was at the beginning.
Can you see now, listeners, why it's called a cleft sentence? Because if we do it the easy way, the normal way, Harry paid the bill, there's just like one chunk, one block. But by doing it the other way, it was Harry who paid the bill. It's divided into two. It's cleft. It's divided. One bit is it was Harry, and the other bit is who paid the bill. So that's why it's called a cleft sentence. Something that could be done as one block has been divided into two parts.
Let's give another example, and you may not know this, Reza, but this is actually true. I had my first kiss in a telephone box.
I didn't know that.
Yep.
No, in London?
It was in London, in a suburb of London, and if you've ever seen those red British telephone boxes that used to exist before we had mobile phones, then that's where I had my first kiss. So I can change that into a cleft sentence and emphasize the funny fact that it was a telephone box by saying it was in a telephone box where I had my first kiss? Now, I'm speaking about a place. That's why I use where. It was in a telephone box where I had my first kiss. Where did you have your first kiss?
About 50 meters away from my house, there's a green area. Well, my parents' house, I should say. There's a green area and there's a few bushes. I went into the bushes. With Stephanie, and there we proceeded to
my sister
was
Stephanie?
Your sister Stephanie, as far as I know. It was another Stephanie who, oh, goodness knows where Stephanie is now. I haven't seen Stephanie in about 42 years.
So it was in a bush where you had your first kiss?
Yes, with Stephanie.
With Stephanie. Let's look at another example. She stole my wallet. How could we change that to a cleft sentence?
Well, if I want to emphasize the fact that it was her, yeah.
Stephanie,
for example, that's why she kissed me. She brought me into the bushes only to get my wallet. It sounds likely, in fact. I could say...
Did you pay her?
I didn't pay her, no. In those days, I didn't have access to any money. I couldn't have paid her. Maybe I give her a sweet or something. I don't know. That doesn't sound too good, does it? I paid someone, a little girl, a sweet to go into the bushes.
No.
But bear in mind, I was only 11 years old myself, so it doesn't sound so bad then. I could say, instead of she stole my wallet, it was her who stole my wallet, or that. Who or that for a person. It was her who that stole my wallet. Emphasizing her. Not him, but her. Actually, there's another way of doing this, but I don't know if I would say it much if I were you listeners. Instead of her, I could say she. It was she who stole my wallet.
That sounds strange to me.
It sounds a bit archaic, doesn't it? A bit old-fashioned. Yeah, so normally when we use a pronoun, we normally use the object form. We say, it was me who, it was him who, it was her who. You can say it was I who or it was you, but you'll sound a little bit 19th century if you do it that way.
Too formal.
Bit too formal, or just being really dramatic. Yeah, like for example, you're a detective and you've got everybody together in the room, and you say, "Now I know who the killer is. It was he who committed the crime." It sounds dramatic, doesn't it?
It was I who had my first kiss in a phone box. Yeah, exactly.
So normally we use the object form. Normally.
Here's another example. We last met in September. Or, cleft sentence, it was September when we last met. Actually, I think it was September when we first met, wasn't it, Reza? It was in 1998 in September.
You've a good memory. Yeah, it was.
The start of the academic term.
That's right. Oh, that was a long time ago.
Yeah, it was in September that we first met.
They were the days. They were the days when we had more hair, less belly, less fat, more common sense.
More common sense?
Well,
I'm not sure. I'm not sure about
that. We never
that.
had much.
No.
So did you notice then that all those cleft sentences started with the word it? It was her who, it was September when. There's another way. Apart from with it, you can start with what. Instead of saying, I want a cup of tea right now, I could say, in a cleft sentence, what I want right now is a cup of tea. So instead of beginning with it, I can start with what. What I want right now is a cup of tea. Remember that what can mean the thing that. That's what it means here. The thing that I want. What I want right now is a cup of tea. So that was beginning with what rather than it. Can you think of any more examples, Craig?
Well, maybe you can give me some advice because, and this is true as well, I don't feel very awake at the moment. I've been sleeping really badly. I haven't been resting enough. I just feel tired. Can you help me?
I could say you need a rest to help you feel better. But what if I want to emphasize what he really needs? I could say, what you need is a rest to help you feel better.
Or what you really need.
If I add the word really, it's even more obvious, isn't it? So compare the two sentences. You need a rest to help you feel better. Or what you really need is a rest to help you feel better. So by adding the word really and by making it a cleft sentence, divided into two parts, I really emphasize the thing that Craig needs.
What I really need is a good night's sleep. That's what I really need. Now, these cleft sentences, they are used in spoken English and in written English, but they are more common in written English when we write. Why, I hear you ask? Well, I'll tell you. This is partly because we can't use stress or intonation for emphasis when we write, can we? We don't usually write in really big letters or a different colour. So if I say, it was Reza who paid the bill, you can hear me stress Reza because that's the emphasis I want to give. It wasn't Harry who paid the bill, it was Reza who paid the bill. How can you do that in writing? Well, you can use a cleft sentence.
Here's a few more examples where the original information is being corrected. So imagine someone says, I think Craig was born in Belfast.
No, it's Reza who was born in Belfast.
Or the podcast show is a conference held in Manchester, isn't it?
No, it's London where the podcast show is held. Actually, I was there recently at the podcast show in London. It was a fantastic event, a lovely conference. And while I was there in London, I visited a friend of mine. He has a shop in Covent Garden Market. Have you been to Covent Garden Market?
A very long time ago. Lovely place.
So if you are going to London as a tourist and you're in the area of Covent Garden Market, I'll put my very short conversation with Mel at the end of this podcast. So listen to the end and you'll hear my conversation with Mel, who has a very London accent.
Here's a few more examples of cleft sentences that you might hear. Just to show you how we emphasize information with them. It was Reza that won the singing competition. So that emphasizes the fact that it was Reza, not Craig, as you might think, but Reza. He was the winner of the singing competition.
And speaking of Reza, I can say it was Reza who helped me pass the C1 exam. So here in that sentence, it's Reza who's highlighted as the person who helped you pass. But we can give that sentence a different focus if we emphasize a different piece of information. For example, it was the C1 exam that Reza helped me pass. Not the B2 exam, the C1 exam. So stressing that and with the cleft sentence gives more emphasis to the information or to the correction if you're correcting information.
You know, Craig, what we need is a very rich sponsor for our podcast, don't you think?
That's what we need. What we need is a very rich sponsor. So if you have a generous advertising budget and work in education, get in touch and we'll get you on board as a sponsor.
There's another very common construction, which is different to beginning with it or that. It's a noun or a noun phrase, a couple of words, plus a relative pronoun, who, that, where, etc., with the relative clause, and a form of the verb to be. So slightly different order than the previous examples.
And if this grammar is confusing you, remember you can read it on the webpage at inglespodcast.com/472 in the show notes.
So here's an example of a normal sentence which doesn't have a cleft sentence. I've asked for this meeting to discuss my salary. That's the normal way. Well, I could make it a cleft sentence by saying the reason why I've asked for this meeting is to discuss my salary. So I begin with a noun phrase, in this case, the reason, and then a relative pronoun, a word like that, which, why, when. So in this case, the word which goes with reason, which collocates with reason, is why. The reason why, and then we have a clause, I've asked for this meeting, and then the verb to be is, and the rest of the sentence, to discuss my salary.
Here's another example, the noun phrase first. Your honesty impresses more than anything else. And to begin with the noun phrase, the thing that impresses me more than anything else is your honesty.
Here's a couple more cleft sentences beginning with a noun phrase, followed by a relative pronoun. The place where we met is not far from here. Or another good month when you can pick mushrooms here is October.
And there's another common construction. And for the grammar, again, if you want to read it, go to the show notes. You can start with the noun phrase, then a form of the verb to be, then your question word, then your clause. Here's an example. Chocolate is what gets Craig through the day. Very true.
The phrasal verb to get a person through means to make them able to survive. In other words, if it weren't for chocolate, Craig would not survive. Chocolate is what gets him through the day. Without it, he's nobody. He's done. He's over.
That's a bit extreme, I would say.
And you know what? Mining Bitcoin is how Craig might become a millionaire.
I don't think I could afford the electricity bill. Of course, last week we spoke on the podcast about Bitcoin. If you want to go and listen to that and learn about Bitcoin, as we did, go to inglespodcast.com/471 for last week's episode. And another example, San Francisco. San Francisco was where it was all happening in the days of flower power. That was where it was all happening.
So now you've seen about three or four now. You've seen exactly 4 different ways of constructing a cleft sentence. As Craig said, it's better to look at the notes to become familiar with the grammar. That's the best way to get used to doing the structures in the right order, because they're all similar, but they're slightly varied depending on if you begin with a noun phrase or begin with it or begin with what. Have a look at the show notes and practice a bit.
And if you want to record your voice and send us your personalized cleft sentences, we'd be happy to include them in a future podcast, and we'll give you details of how to do that at the end of the episode. So it will be at the end of the episode when we will tell you how to do that. Cleft sentence. So Reza, tell me, what is it that you like most about your job? Can you answer with a cleft sentence? You're not sure, are you? Is there anything you like about your job?
Yeah, I just thinking about how to get it into a cleft sentence. It's the realization on people's faces that they've learned something new, which gives me enjoyment. It's the realization on people's faces that they've learned something new or useful that gives me enjoyment. That's what I like.
Not easy to do with a podcast. We have to imagine the look on their faces.
Oh, well, I was thinking there about my day job.
I know, I'm joking.
Your day job, the one that earns money, because listeners, as you're very well aware, it is free to listen to this podcast. So could we call it a job? Well, in a way, but an unpaid job.
So it's for the love of podcasting that we do this.
This thing, yeah.
I think something very similar to you. I think it's the people I like most. It's the challenge of helping them speak better English that I like most about my job. It's never boring.
Craig, I've got a question for you. Let's see if you can answer with a cleft sentence. What's one of your favorite restaurants, and what is it that makes this restaurant so popular, or why do you like it so much?
There's a very, very nice restaurant down where my sister lives in the Denia Javier area. It's called Bonam. And it's a wonderful restaurant. It's quite expensive. It's the service, it's the food, and it's the atmosphere that I like most about this restaurant. Actually, it's everything I like about this restaurant, but it's a special place that my sister and I go maybe once a year on her birthday to celebrate something.
I tell you what we should do. What we need to do is ask them to sponsor this episode, because you've just given them 5 out of 5 points there.
Yeah, that's true. We should. Reza, who's the person that means most to you?
Ooh, what a difficult question.
Please answer with a cleft sentence.
That's a difficult. You're worried about answering this type of question too directly, because what if you didn't name a person who thought they might be named?
They might get offended.
Yeah. I think whether you like it or not, it's your mother who brought you into this world. So the person that you should be most thankful to is your mother. That's my opinion. What do you think?
Do I have to choose?
No, you can agree or disagree.
I disagree. It's my wife and my sister who mean the most to me.
Ah, but still women. So it's definitely women are important, that's for sure.
Oh, yes, for sure. But it's interesting that we say it is my wife and my sister and not they are. It's the singular. It's my wife and sister, but I'm speaking about two people.
Ah, yes, of course, because we got to follow the rules of the cleft sentence, which are, in this case, begin with it. It and the verb to be. That's right.
Yep.
Craig, when is it, I mean, what time of the day, when is it that you usually feel most productive?
Good question. Now it's early in the morning when I feel most productive and I am most productive. Not early in the morning because I don't get up very early. It used to be late at night, but it's early in the morning. I'm more of an early bird now, not a night owl. What about you?
Yes, for me, it's mid-morning when I feel most active. Also, like you, not first thing in the morning. It's mid-morning when I feel.
Before lunch.
Before lunch. After breakfast, before lunch. That's the sweet spot, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. But now it's your turn to practice your English. Why don't you send us a voice message and practice your cleft sentences? Or let us know if you can think of any songs with phrasal verbs in them. We'd love to hear from you. Tell us where you're from, your name, and leave us a message. Remember, the service we use has a limit of 90 seconds. So if you want to speak for longer, you can record your voice and attach it to an email. But for the voice messages, go to speakpipe.com. That's speakpipe.com/English podcast. Emails, Reza?
If you can't leave an audio message or you feel a bit shy for the moment, you could send an email to craig@inglespodcast.com or me, belfastreza@gmail.com.
We remind you that this podcast is sponsored in part by mentioningles.com. Why don't you visit the online store? Go to store.mentioningles.net where you'll find some paid courses to help you with your English.
As always, we'd like to thank the people who support the podcast through the Patreon scheme. That's Patreon, Patreon. And if you're interested, you could join the program for as little as $1.50 per month. And as a thank you to the people who donate that money, we give them instant access to recent audio transcriptions. So if you're interested, why not have a look at the link in the show notes? It's patreon.com/English-podcast.
And unfortunately, we don't have time to thank you all individually. The list is just too long, but we will say hello and thank you to our latest Patreon supporters who have joined us recently. And they are Diego Perez, David Lopez, Soledad Garcia Rodriguez, John, Valerie Nayeli Villanueva, Manuel Sandoval, Isabel Melian, Albert B., Tony Esteve, and Miguel Lopez Costella. Thank you to you and to everybody who's supporting us on Patreon. What's next week, Reza?
In next week's episode,
What's
the most common sound in the English language.
the most common sound in English language? We'll tell you all about next week. So if you want some pronunciation help, don't forget to listen to us next week. Until then, have a wonderful week. Thank you for listening this week. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please tell your friends so that more people can listen. It's goodbye from Reza.
And it's bye-bye from Craig.
The music in this podcast is by Pitts. The track is called See You Later. Here I am in Covent Garden Market and I've met Mel, who has a lovely shop here. Mel, hello. Can you tell the listeners where your accent's from?
My accent, so I'm a true East Ender, and it's a bit Cockney. And the reason you're a Cockney is because you have to be born within 1 mile of the Bow Bells. I was born at Whitechapel Hospital, at London Hospital, and that's why I'm classed as a Cockney. So it's a proper London accent.
Okay, I think that's coming through. I think we can hear that. So we're in your lovely shop. Can you describe for the listeners what you sell here and why it's a good idea for tourists to stop by and meet you?
Okay, so I've got quite a quirky shop here. It's a traditional sweet shop with English products in jars. I specialise in fudge, which comes up from Cornwall. You have English toffee, and there's lots of other interesting stuff. I do a lot of gifts in embossed tins, London themed, vintage themed. I also have a little section where I deal with antiques, die-cast cars, and a lot of this stuff is about 25, 30 years old. A lot of it's TV, to do with corgi. Also, I have a very special section where you can buy a real scorpion in a lollipop.
A scorpion in a lollipop?
Yep.
Is that safe, Bill?
It's safe. It comes from the US and it has to be tested before it gets here. Also, you can buy mealworms and crickets and worms, salt and vinegar, bacon and cheese flavour. So as I say, it's quite a quirky shop. It's not just your run-of-the-mill. I saw lots of puzzles related to London and a lot of antiques stuff as well. But if you come down and visit me, you will have a lovely experience. And if you tell me you heard me on the podcast, I'll charge you double. No.
I know, I think you'll probably offer a little discount, won't you?
Of course, yeah. All right, only if you smile.
Thanks very much, Bill.
That's all right. God bless.